Hey everyone, just a quick reminder. Only about 25% of you watching are subscribed to the channel. If you're enjoying the content, hitting that subscribe button would really help the channel grow. And while you're at it, smash that like button too. It helps a ton, and lets me know you're enjoying the content. Thanks for being here, and let's dive into the story. I never thought I'd leave Spirit Aerosystems, but when you're an outstanding employee who makes it through every round of layoffs because you can build an airplane wing blindfolded, you get bored. So, I decided to switch gears, literally, and applied for a third-shift management position at Coors Brewing Company. I figured, beer and machinery? That's basically my two favorite things in one job. To my surprise, they hired me. My name is Russell, and if there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that I'm about as sharp as a bowling ball. But hey, I make up for it with personality and beer tolerance. My first day at Coors was a mixed bag. My new boss, Jim, who looked like he hadn't slept since Prohibition, ushered me into his tiny office. He gave me this long-winded speech about the company, safety protocols, and the sacred traditions of the brewery, whatever that means. But then, he hit me with a list of rules. Listen, Russell, third shift is special, Jim said, narrowing his bloodshot eyes. There are 5 rules you gotta follow. Don't drink the red label beer after 11 p.m. Don't whistle in the warehouse. It attracts attention. Always check the expiration dates on the yeast barrels. If one says 1902, don't touch it. If you hear someone whisper your name, ignore it. It's just the building settling. And for the love of hops, don't ever touch the forklift's horn at night. I wrote them down on the back of a napkin, thinking, yeah, sure, Jim. Rules. Got it. I was already planning where I'd stash my beer for the night. Now about me. I'm 5 feet 6 inches on a good day, and thanks to an aggressive tanning bed habit, my skin has the same hue as a burnt pumpkin pie. I'm not what you'd call subtle. My coworkers got a kick out of my first night swagger as I strutted into the break room with my lunchbox, which of course was just a 6-pack cooler. Russell, you better pace yourself, one of them joked. Please, I'll pace you under the table, I shot back. By 11:15, I'd already broken rule number 1. I found a stash of red label beer, cracked one open, and downed it like it was water. By midnight, I was on beer number 6, tucked away in a dark corner of the warehouse. Feeling pretty good about myself, I decided it was time to test the forklift. Now, I'll admit, operating heavy machinery while buzzed isn't my brightest idea. But hey, life's short. I took that forklift for a joyride, narrowly missing a stack of kegs. When I inevitably crashed into a shelf, I panicked. I scrambled to rearrange the scene, kicking over some stray pallets and dousing the area with spilled beer. By the time anyone showed up, it looked like a freak accident. Darn shelf must have been loose, I said, leaning heavily on my bad knee for sympathy. The crew bought it, laughing and shaking their heads. Classic Russell, one guy muttered. Little did I know, my antics were just the beginning. That warehouse had a vibe, an atmosphere that felt off. But I chalked it up to beer goggles and went about my shift, feeling like the king of Coors. By my second hour on the job, things started to get weird. I was sweeping up the remnants of my forklift accident when I heard a faint sound, like someone whispering my name. Russell. Russell. I froze, broom in hand. My first thought was, Jim's pulling a prank on the new guy. But when I peeked around the corner, there was no one there. Just rows and rows of towering beer kegs, gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights. The sound came again, softer this time. Russell. Must be the building settling, I muttered, remembering rule number 4. Or maybe I'm just hearing things. Too many beers. I shook it off and went back to work, but the warehouse had other plans. As I pushed the broom, I noticed one of the kegs wobbling on the top shelf. I barely had time to register what was happening before it toppled off and smacked me square on the head. Ouch! It busted my melon, I yelled, stumbling backward and clutching my forehead. Beer oozed out of the keg, forming a puddle at my feet. For a moment I stood there, dazed, wondering if I'd suffered brain damage. Then I saw something, or someone, out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darted across the far end of the warehouse, disappearing behind a stack of barrels. My heart skipped a beat. "Jim?" I called out. No response. I grabbed a nearby wrench, because apparently, in my beer-soaked brain, a wrench is the perfect ghost-fighting weapon, and cautiously approached the barrels. "All right, prank's over. You're messing with the wrong guy," I shouted, trying to sound intimidating. But when I rounded the corner, there was nothing there. Just more barrels and that unsettling flicker of the lights. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Too much red label. That's all this is. Determined not to let my first night get derailed by spooky nonsense. I cleaned myself up and got back to work. But the weirdness didn't stop. Tools started disappearing from my cart, only to reappear in bizarre places. My clipboard ended up on a shelf 20 feet high. My broom was somehow wedged in the rafters. And don't even get me started on the pallet jack that kept moving on its own. Of course, I blamed everything on the crew. "You guys think you're real funny, huh?" I said during a break, pointing an accusing finger at my coworkers. They just shrugged and gave me blank looks. "Russell, nobody's messing with you," one guy said. "You sure you're okay?" "Okay? I'm better than okay," I shot back, cracking open another beer. Disguised as a Dr. Pepper can. See, I have these sleeves that look like Dr. Pepper cans I can slide over the can, so nobody knows my secret. The rest of the shift was a blur of strange occurrences and bad decisions. At one point, I accidentally hit the forklift horn, breaking rule number 5. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a banshee's scream. I immediately regretted it. For a moment, everything went still. The air felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then, all hell broke loose. The lights flickered violently, and a chilling wind swept through the warehouse, knocking over boxes and rattling shelves. I swear I heard laughter, deep, guttural laughter, like something straight out of a horror movie. "All right, that's enough," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Who's messing with me?" No response, just that eerie, suffocating silence. At this point, I was convinced the place was haunted, but instead of running for the hills like a sane person, I did what any idiot would do. I cracked open another beer. If ghosts were real, I figured they'd appreciate a guy who could drink them under the table. By the end of my shift, I was more spooked than I'd ever admit, but I chalked it all up to exhaustion and too much booze. After all, what kind of grown man gets scared of a brewery? Little did I know the night was far from over. When my second night at Coors Brewing Company rolled around, I told myself I'd keep it together. No red label beers, no forklift shenanigans, and no freaking out over ghosts, I muttered on my way in, still nursing a headache from my head meets keg incident. But let's be honest, Russel isn't exactly known for self-restraint. By 10 p.m., I'd already polished off 3 beers. For hydration, I told myself. By 11, I was creeping dangerously close to rule number 1 territory. That red label stash was calling my name like a siren, luring a sailor to his doom. "Just one," I whispered to myself, grabbing a bottle. "What's the worst that could happen?" I chugged it down and immediately felt that warm, fuzzy glow spreading through my veins. See? Nothing to it. I leaned back against a stack of crates, basking in my rebellion, when I heard it again. "Russell." I froze. This time the voice was clearer, closer. My blood ran cold as I scanned the warehouse. The shadows seemed darker, the air heavier. "All right, come out, you coward," I shouted, clutching a wrench like it was Excalibur. A crate fell from a nearby shelf, crashing to the floor with a deafening thud. I jumped about 3 feet in the air, letting out a very manly scream, if you ask me. I turned around and came face to face with nothing. Just the overturned crate and its contents, a bunch of empty bottles, scattered across the floor. "Get it together, Russell," I muttered, picking up the mess. But as I stood, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I whipped around, swinging the wrench wildly, only to find, yep, you guessed it, nothing. My heart was pounding like a drum solo in a rock concert. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," I shouted into the void. Then I saw it. At the far end of the warehouse, illuminated by the faint glow of a flickering bulb, was a figure. Tall, lanky, and impossibly still. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, watching me. "Jim, is that you?" I called out, my voice cracking. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step forward. That was enough for me. I bolted in the opposite direction, my beer-fueled courage evaporating faster than a spilled pint on a summer day. I ducked into the break room, slamming the door behind me and locking it for good measure. "All right, Russ. Think. You're not crazy, you're just, tipsy." "Yeah, that's it. Tipsy." But the break room wasn't exactly a sanctuary. The coffee maker started sputtering on its own, spewing hot liquid everywhere. The microwave beeped incessantly, flashing the time 3:33, even though it was barely midnight. And the vending machine. Oh, the vending machine. It started shaking violently, its contents rattling like an earthquake had hit. "Y'all need to calm down!" I yelled at the appliances, which of course didn't listen. Then came the knocking. It started softly, a rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the break room door. "Nope," I whispered, backing away. The knocking grew louder, more frantic, until it sounded like someone, or something, was trying to break the door down. I grabbed the nearest weapon, a stale bagel from the counter, and prepared to defend myself. The door burst open, and I hurled the bagel with all my might, hitting a very confused-looking Jim square in the chest. "What the hell, Russell?" he barked, brushing crumbs off his shirt. "What are you doing in here?" Team spirit?" I stammered, trying to play it cool. "Just, hyping myself up for the shift." Jim squinted at me, clearly not buying it. "You've been drinking, haven't you?" "Me? Drinking? No, sir. Just hydrating. Electrolytes, you know?" He sighed, muttering something about regretting his hiring decisions, and walked off. I stayed in the break room for a while, trying to piece together what was happening. Was the warehouse haunted? Was I losing my mind? Or was this just a really bad hangover? The rest of the night was a blur of paranoia and poor decisions. I kept seeing things. Shadows moving, figures darting around corners, tools floating in mid-air. At one point, I was convinced the forklift was following me. Yes, the forklift. But the kicker came around 2 a.m. when I heard the whisper again, clear as day. "Russell." This time I didn't run. I turned around, ready to confront whatever was tormenting me. "All right, show yourself," I shouted, raising my wrench like a lunatic. And that's when I saw it. A face. Pale, hollow-eyed, and grinning like it knew something I didn't. It hovered in the darkness, just out of reach, and whispered one word. "Drink." I did what any rational person would do. I grabbed another beer. If there's one thing I've learned in my 57 years of life, it's that when a ghostly face tells you to drink, you don't argue. You grab the nearest cold one and say, "Cheers." So that's exactly what I did. Cracking open another Red Label beer, I downed it in 2 gulps, hoping the alcohol would dull whatever was happening around me. It didn't. The face didn't disappear. If anything, it got closer. Its grin widened, showing teeth that were too sharp to belong to anything human. Its hollow eyes seemed to pull me in like 2 black holes in a sea of shadows. And then it spoke again. "Another," it whispered. I nodded like an idiot and reached for another beer. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, but I managed to pop the top and take a swig. "Okay, buddy, I'm drinking. You happy now?" The face vanished, leaving me alone in the eerily silent warehouse. I exhaled a shaky breath, convincing myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was just overtired, or overdrunk, or both. Feeling brave, or maybe just stupid, I decided to finish the rest of my shift. I stumbled back to the forklift, muttering to myself about how ghosts didn't exist and how I really needed to cut back on the Red Label. But as soon as I climbed into the driver's seat, the forklift came alive. I'm not kidding. The thing started moving on its own, lurching forward like it had a vendetta against me. "Whoa! Easy there!" I shouted, clinging to the wheel. It veered left, then right, then slammed into a stack of barrels with enough force to send them crashing to the floor. Beer erupted like a geyser, spraying everywhere and soaking me from head to toe. "Well, great," I grumbled, wiping foam out of my eyes. "Now I smell like a frat party." I climbed out of the forklift, determined to clean up the mess before Jim, or worse, the ghost, showed up. But as I reached for a mop, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Laughter. Deep, guttural, and definitely not human. "All right, who's there?" I yelled, spinning around. My voice echoed through the warehouse, but there was no response. Just that damned laughter, echoing from the shadows. Then the lights went out. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The only light came from the glow of the forklift's dashboard, casting eerie shadows across the rows of kegs. I fumbled for my flashlight, but my beer-soaked hands couldn't get a grip on anything. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall, lanky, and unmistakably not human, standing at the far end of the aisle. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its hands ended in claws that glinted in the dim light. "Russel," it whispered, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You broke the rules." "Listen, buddy," I said, backing away slowly. "I'm new here. Maybe cut me some slack?" The figure didn't move. It just stared at me, its grin widening until it stretched unnaturally across its face. "Drink," it said. "Drink? You mean another beer?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Drink," it repeated, stepping closer. Not wanting to upset whatever this thing was, I grabbed a can from a nearby crate, popped it open, and chugged it like my life depended on it, which, to be fair, it probably did. "There. Happy?" I asked, wiping my mouth. The figure stopped, tilting its head as if considering my offer. Then, without warning, it lunged at me. I screamed, a high-pitched, undignified sound, and threw the empty can at its face. It passed right through, hitting the floor with a clatter. The figure dissolved into smoke, leaving me gasping for air. At this point, I was convinced I was either haunted or hallucinating. Either way, I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I grabbed my cooler and bolted for the break room, slamming the door behind me. Inside, I found my trusty wrench and clutched it like a lifeline. "All right, Russ," I muttered to myself. "You're not crazy. You're just drunk. This is all in your head." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The warehouse felt alive, like it was watching me, waiting for me to screw up again. And knowing me, it wouldn't have to wait long. I sat in the break room, clutching my wrench, heart pounding like a jackhammer. I had no idea what was real anymore. The whispering, the ghostly faces, the haunted forklift. Was it all in my head? Or was this warehouse actually trying to kill me? Either way, I needed answers, and I wasn't about to let a beer ghost ruin my new job. I cracked open one last Red Label beer for courage and chugged it in record time. "All right, Russ," I muttered, wiping foam from my lips. "Time to face your demons. Or whatever the hell they are." Gripping my wrench like it was Excalibur, I stepped out of the break room and into the cavernous warehouse. The air felt heavier than usual, like the place was holding its breath. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and every creak and groan of the building sent chills down my spine. "Russell!" the voice called again, louder this time. Yeah, I hear you," I shouted back, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Why don't you come out and say it to my face, huh?" The whispering stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. Then, slowly, one of the kegs began to roll toward me. It wobbled and veered, like it was being pushed by an invisible hand. I raised my wrench, ready to swing, but the keg stopped just a few feet away. Its label gleamed under the dim lights. Red Label. Do not drink after 11 p.m. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I muttered. "Is this about the beer? Look, I didn't know it was haunted, all right?" The keg didn't respond, obviously. But then I heard it again. Laughter. Low, guttural, and unmistakably mocking. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, trying to pinpoint its source, but the warehouse was empty. "All right, that's it," I yelled. "I'm done playing games." Fueled by equal parts fear and liquid courage, I marched down the aisle, kicking over crates and kegs as I went. "You want me? Come get me," I shouted. "I've got a wrench and a blood alcohol level that'll scare a breathalyzer." That's when I saw it. The same shadowy figure from before, standing at the far end of the aisle. Its glowing eyes bored into me, and its grin stretched impossibly wide. "Russel," it whispered. "You've been careless." "Careless? I'm the hardest working guy on this shift," I shot back, pointing my wrench at it. "You think this place would run without me?" The figure tilted its head, as if amused by my outburst. Then, slowly, it began to dissolve into a swirling mist. For a moment, I thought it was gone. But then the mist started to form letters in the air, glowing faintly in the darkness. "Check the cameras." I blinked, unsure if I was reading that right. Check the cameras? What is this? A scavenger hunt? But I figured I didn't have much to lose. I made my way to the security office, where the camera feeds were displayed on a wall of flickering monitors. My hands trembled as I rewound the footage from the past 2 nights, half expecting to see the ghostly figure stalking me through the warehouse. What I saw instead made my stomach drop. There were no ghosts, no shadowy figures, no haunted forklifts. Just me, stumbling around like a drunken idiot, talking to thin air and waving my wrench at nothing. The crate that hit me in the head? I'd accidentally bumped the shelf while trying to balance on a stack of pallets. The forklift crash? That was all me, joyriding like a moron. Even the ghostly whispering was just the echo of my own drunken muttering. I sat there in stunned silence, replaying the footage over and over. Every strange occurrence, every spooky moment. It was all my own doing. The horrifying realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't being haunted. I was just drunk out of my mind. "Son of a..." I muttered, burying my face in my hands. I spent the rest of the shift cleaning up my messes, feeling equal parts embarrassed and relieved. The ghost wasn't real, but my hangover definitely was. By the time morning rolled around, I'd made a decision. No more red label beers. At least not until I was off the clock. The next night, I showed up for my shift with a cooler full of water and Gatorade instead of beer. My coworkers noticed immediately. "Whoa, Russell's going sober?" one of them joked. "What happened? Did you see a ghost?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Nah, just saw myself. Turns out, that's scarier." From that day forward, I stuck to the rules. Mostly. I still broke rule number 2 occasionally, whistling just to freak out the newbies. But I never touched another red label beer during a shift. And while I'll always be a little bit of an idiot, at least I'm not a haunted idiot.